Good morning, friends. I welcome you all on behalf of the RCRC Coalition. I'm delighted to share with you the fact that RCRC has started a new series of webinars on issues of contemporary importance. And I'm glad we are starting with the new education policy of the Government of India. Union Cabinet approved the NEP on 29th of July, a little more than a month ago. We are still within our time to understand it better, to comment on it, and share with public what we think of it. I want to tell you a story. A long time ago, almost 15 years ago, I began working in Bihar, and I met and became friends with a senior policy maker. Some of you might know Vijay Prakash, who started running a school outside Patna for the children of those children of those who were on the margins of society. One day, as he started the class, he asked the child, what did he want to become? And this was the son of a Musahar. You can guess what was his answer. Teacher plays an important role in motivating someone, his students, her students, to aim high, to transcend boundaries. And let me quote from a poet, Maithili Sharan Gupta, who hated to be in school. As a child, संसार में किसका समय है एक सा रहता सदा, है निशी दिवासी घूमती सर्वत्र विपदा संपदा, जो आज एक अनाथ है नरनाथ होता कल होता वही, जो आज एक अनाथ है नरनाथ कल होता वही, जो आज उत्सव मग्न है कल शोक से रोता वही. Would education be a mechanism of social change, of social transformation? Or is education a mechanism of transmission of facts, controlling their thinking and action, leading women and men to adjust to the world, inhibiting their creative power and energies? From Vijay Prakash's school, someone quotes, the day the results are declared, 99% of children feel unhappy. 99% children unhappy on the day the results are declared. Laying the foundation of critical pedagogy, a famous Brazilian educationist, Paulo Freire, said, no pedagogy which is truly liberating can remain distant from the oppressed by treating them as unfortunates and by presenting for their emulation models from among the oppressors. So who could be the role model for the Musahar children? The oppressed must be their own example in the struggle for their redemption. Bhimrao Ambedkar is one such great Bharat Ratna for us as an example. I am happy my friends found time to be here today. I must thank each of them from the bottom of my heart. The distinguished panelists, Madam Vidya Sarup, Mr. Aditya Natraj, Ms. Nagma Mullah and Ms. Vanita Vishnath, and no less a distinguished moderator, Mr. Manmohan Singh, who will moderate the webinar and in whom I have full faith. Vanita is a member of RCRC's governing body called Working Committee, thus represents us, our leadership on the panel. Once again, I welcome all of you, every one of my friends who are attending today's webinar. I am happy to hand over to Mr. Manmohan Singh in charge of this webinar. Thank you all once again.
Thank you, Ved. Thank you so much for laying out the why we are doing this webinar. I'm very happy and privileged to have the panelists with me to have the conversation on national education policy. I just want to quote Prime Minister recently said कि राष्ट्रीय शिक्षा नीति केवल पढ़ाई लिखाई के तौर तरीके को बदलने के लिए नहीं है. राष्ट्रीय शिक्षा नीति भारत के आर्थिक और सामाजिक जीवन को नया दिशा देने के लिए है. And it is important for all of us to first understand what this policy is. And I'm very thankful to the RCRC members, who is a collective which has been working for long in livelihood space, has decided to do this conversation in education. And I just want to emphasize on what is written on the poster of this webinar, the first few lines that break the silos. While, in the non-profit space or in government or in corporate, we have been talking that how everyone need to come together and work for a common cause. Within social organization as well, we are compartmentalized. We started with all good purpose that we need to understand education, we need to understand livelihood, health and all that. And that's how we have been organized. Now, the question here is that if we need to ensure that quality of life of every individual improves, then, I work in education, I go for the same women, as women in the village, and talk and have conversation about her children's education. Someone else goes and work with same women for livelihood. Someone else goes and works for nutrition. Now, if nutrition doesn't improve, education will not. If education doesn't improve, vocationalization of education, livelihood may not happen. So I'm extremely happy that this webinar is bringing panelists from different space to able to start breaking those silos and have the conversation together. So I'm very happy to introduce Madam Vrinda Swarup. And thank you, ma'am, for joining us for this webinar. And just to introduce, you need no introduction, but I want to emphasize a few things. You have spent 23 years in education within your services, 23 years. And out of that, you have spent almost more than 13, 14 years in MHRD, central government. Not just that, you also did it state, one of the largest state in India, Uttar Pradesh, right? And a lot of people say if you know how to change UP, you might be able to move the country. You have been part of policy and implementation of the landmark policies in the countries in last 20, 30 years, whether it was DPEP, which was one of the known program in the country, or Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, or recently RTE, or the vocationalization of education. So you have been part of that. I'm very happy that now you are on the panel. So welcome, ma'am. We'll be very happy to hear your perspective, experience to help us understand. So thank you so much for joining. We have Aditya, very dynamic, very different background. He comes from. Aditya is a CEO and founder of Cavalier Education Foundation, which and Piramalli School of Leadership. And Cavalier works to support the government in systemic change in public education system in India. And Cavalier works with 14, 15 state with their 15,000 plus leaders to be able to improve learning outcome of more than 5 million children. Cavalier also runs a 2 years Gandhi Fellowship program. Before Cavalier, Aditya was part of Pratham, Gujarat as a director and worked there for 5 years. He was in corporate, as usual, Indian aspiration that, you go to good school, then you go to good, MBA colleges and go to a corporate. He also followed that path. He is a graduate from INSEAD. He is also master in economics and he worked abroad for a few years, but something happened to him which brought him back to India and he's been working in education. So welcome, Aditya, for this webinar. We look forward to have your perspective, experience on NEP, understanding, and also way forward. Welcome, Aditya. We have Nagma Mullah, young dynamic again from Mumbai. Again, similar sort of path in the beginning that, corporate is the route. So she is a chartered accountant, worked in corporate again for many years, Bajaj Alliance and others, and something happened to her, calling, and now she's working for almost a decade in foundation, Edelgive Foundation. And one of the key things she has been able to do in last few years is that bring together collective in education, bring together many organizations and see how we can work together, not just non-profit, but also bring together CSR for a common cause. So she runs collective in education. Recently, Edelgive has started also collective for migrant worker. as a large collective of 60 organizations and also large collective of the CSR coming together. And there are many other collective as well. So very happy, Nagma, to have you here to share the perspective that how do we bring people together to solve a common problem. So welcome, Nagma. We have Vanita. Vanita is a part of RCSC working committee member. Vanita co-founded Udyogani, is an organization working in livelihood space. She is now also chair of Ajivika Bureau and do a lot of work in women entrepreneurship. She is also on the board of a couple of organizations, and in the past she used to work with the World Bank. Because your experience is a lot around women, around entrepreneurship, livelihood. So I'm very excited to have you, Vanita, on the panel to bring that perspective of NEP. So welcome, Vanita. Thank you. I want to thank audience for joining us. The format of the panel, I would like to, Madam Vrinda Swaroop, to give your opening remarks for 8-10 minutes, and then I'll go to each panel for your opening remarks. Then we would want to focus on the few aspects of NEP and not all. So we will not discuss the higher education today. We might conduct other seminars because each of these areas is so deep. So today we want to focus on pre-school, we want to focus on curriculum, we want to focus on vocational education, teacher education, foundational learning. And we will try to do that at the end, half an hour, 45 minutes. We'll also have questions from audience and we'll try to address that. So over to Madam Vrinda Swaroop for your opening thoughts.
Thank you, Manmohan, and thank you for having me on this webinar. It's a pleasure to be here today and talk a little bit about what aspects of the national education policy are standing out and which we need to get our heads around and hands around. Let me share a few things which for me were the key takeaways, and we can talk about those in detail a little later. First and foremost, I think it's important to understand what is the context of an educational policy, and that by and large, policies, if they are in the right spirit, are naturally good and in the right direction. And but I think for an education policy, it's very critical also to see it from the perspective of where we are as a country in the whole curve of educational development and planning. And when I put it in that context, I found the new education policy significant in the fact that it respects a continuum in education policy development and planning. And to me, that's a good thing, because in a big and complex country like ours, any knee-jerk or any far-out angles would be, would be probably counterproductive. So I think I respect their continuum, which is to see how you can make things better, improve better, build on the past, build on whatever gains the country has made in the past, and then move forward and look for improvement and betterment. Having said that, it's also significant to see that in educational development, there are always new challenges which are coming up by the day. And I think this is important to recognize when you're making policy, because you have to be responsive to those new issues which are coming on and the dynamics of those issues which are coming forward. So in that context, I think a lot of what is said on the school education sector is what I call a point of emphasis, which the policy brings out. There are many things in the continuum which are going on, but then where do you pick and choose and prioritize and emphasize and say that, all right, these are the postulates and the spirit with which I will move forward. So in that context, I think we have about, to my mind, about 5-6 areas which are good in the sense that this is where the emphasis should be. And one of them is what was being alluded to earlier, is about the learning. are we helping children learn? Are we helping them move forward in their academic performance? That's one major part. And I think there has been a lot of critique in the country that yes, you've managed to get children into school, but you also have to look at what is happening inside the school and see how the learning outcomes and many related issues with that are happening, and children are coming out with some basic understanding, apart from many other issues which are in education. So let me take the first sort of throw that the policy makes is about the foundational learning. So we've had reports from government and non-governmental sector, which is saying your children are not learning enough, their basics are not good enough. So I think that's the point of emphasis which this policy brings and says, look, we've got to do something about it. And there's a spirit there that this needs to be watched closer, and there must be systems and imperatives which make this happen well. So I think that's one area of emphasis which I think is in response to what is happening in the country. The second, I think, is another area which is being recognized full front in the educational policy, which is to say that early childhood education is critical. And that there is a continuum from the pedagogy which the child is supposed to be part of in the preschool stages. And this must be a transition in the early years of learning in a formal school. So that continuum is being recognized, which the policy says, you know, the first 5-year block of learning is a more of a brushstroke for pedagogy. And that there must be a basic foundational starts at that stage. And this is the time for the most rapid cognitive development and so on. And this is the point where the maximum emphasis should come. So that's another good area for emphasis. It's fraught with a lot of issues, but we'll come to that subsequently, I'm sure. The third area which stood out for me was the whole issue about vocational education. And now again, this is a continuum. A lot has happened in the country, contextualized in the sense we also have now skill parameters, we have measurements by which we can see how much skills you're required, you have a national qualifications framework, so on and so forth. A lot of work has also happened on looking at courses and skill sets which are compatible with an academic learning which is happening in schools, in high schools. So it is not to say that the schools will have, you know, the highly technical or very professional stuff like, you know, refrigeration or plumbing or stuff like that, but more on the softer skill areas which are highly compatible with the subject studies that they are doing in their academic stream. So there's a compatibility which has been looked at and developed over a period of time. I remain closely associated with that, so I know that there is a grounding there which is solid, and some of the state boards have already started work in giving these options to students. But the whole idea that this policy says that you know, children must have either by option or if schools want them to, what the policy says that every child should have some skills, but it is also an option for them, is to have a set of skills which you could pursue seriously in high school, and which a familiarization can begin much earlier. But again, I think the policy needs a little work in detailing, and I'm sure in the implementation of these things, there will be better ground to cover and connect as to what is expected to be delivered. So I think this is a great option, and for Indian children, this is very vital because there are many who may want to do a bit of earning before they plug back into the academic stream, or just want to better their skill sets. So I think this is an important signal, and I hope and pray that this really continues to fulfill its spirit. To my mind, the most fundamental thing which this policy makes, and I have not read it in earlier policies, is to have an examination reform, which is to say how boards will assess students who are passing out of 10th or class 12 school leaving stage. Now, here is where the big change in my mind, to my mind, has been signaled. And they say, and it's saying that we are going to give a thumbs down to the rote and the knowledge accumulating type of education that we have been imparting, and that we will shift to more to assessing students' reasoning abilities, applicability of principles, and a higher order reasoning, which is very desirable. And I think that is what true education was about, and we were somewhere getting lost. Our kids are good; they have enormous, font of knowledge, but we do sometimes fault on the ability to be able to, do the right analysis in our head. Not that we are not capable of it, but as a system, we were not encouraging it to its hilt. So I think that is a big change. And if this change is really brought in, again, some changes of this are already happening in some of the central boards. But if we could get this across to states, to the state boards where bulk of our children are, I think you're going to see a huge change. Not only in the way they're assessed, but the way you're assessed also leads to the way you're taught, to the way the classroom functions, to the way the teacher is engaging with the students. So I think downstream effect will be far, far more profound and hugely desirable. So that I thought is something I'd flag. And lastly, if I may just add one more point, is about, there's a section on teacher education. And teacher education is exciting because it is seeking to overhaul the entire way in which you prepare a teacher for school. We all know there used to be one-year B.Eds with correspondence, didn't see the inside of a classroom and so on. And the results are there for many of us to see. But if you are changing that, and I think I appreciate the multidisciplinary attitude there. I also appreciate a lot of the fact that you're giving various options to young students who want to become teachers. Those who are very clear that they want to become a teacher can actually fast track becoming a teacher, save time, because you can combine a BA and a B.Ed program. Secondly, if you want to specialize with your subject learning, you can do that also. You can also specialize if you want at the postgraduate stage, you want to become a curriculum developer, or you want to become an expert on how high school maths is taught. So there are these huge number of content changes, and of course the duration of the program, and also the exposure to actually working in classrooms while you are learning is I think a shift which had already started, if many of you recall, with the Justice Verma recommendations which came from the Supreme Court, and by 2014 many of these changes had started to be worked in. But now it's being recognized, it's being promoted, and it's being expanded. So that I think is a good trend. But before I close, I also want to flag what I think are things which are missing in this policy debate. And I wish there was more on what can be done about the whole management of the school system. It's one of the largest systems anywhere in the world. It's in a democratic country where parents have choice, teachers' unions are powerful, where there are issues about, complex issues about medium of instruction and so on and so forth. So you have to have a recognition of the fact that you have 25 crore children in schools. You have almost 50 lakh teachers. You have more than 15 lakh schools. How are you going to manage this system? You have recognized that it is not delivering optimally. You're still expanding the system, but then you've got to recognize how are you going to manage it better? How is it going to be more effective? Where are the accountability issues? There's some references piecemeal are there in the policy, but as a coherent, it doesn't give you a feeling or a satisfaction that yes, this system is going to be managed better. So I think that was one. And the second one I'd flag is that I think we've missed an opportunity by deferring. The policy actually defers compulsory, free and compulsory education up to class 12 and says we look at it later, or we look at it in a phased manner. As a policy, the spirit, in my view, should have been that we will do it, and that we will do it in a time frame. How you do it, what you do it are the details, which in implementation machinery. But as a country, we should have signaled that we still intend to bring every child up to class 10 and up to class 12, so that their basic grounding and their basic whatever social academic development we want to ensure as good Indians is something that we will address. So these are, to me, the two most glaring, and there are several others which we will talk about other points, but I think this is perhaps the most, it's a missed opportunity, if I may put it like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I want now to invite Aditya to share his opening remarks.
Can you hear me? It's difficult to share anything after Vrindaji. I think she's covered everything from preschool to the change in. So all my 5 points you've covered, Vrindaji. So I don't know what to add now. So I was quickly rethinking. I think I'd just like to emphasize one portion of this, maybe a little bit more deeply. Considering we're speaking to a group of people who've been working in livelihoods. And for this, actually, I don't want to go to the policy. I want to go to the life of a girl in Jharkhand and just go through her life experience. She's a tribal girl. The school has opened locally in a language which is not her home language. And she's been asked to go for that. So she goes for that. It's taught by a teacher who's not from her community, who comes into that school, comes and teaches her. She's not been to preschool before, so she doesn't as yet know how to socialize, sit with other children, take an instruction from another adult who's not her parent, follow that instruction in a language which is not her home language. So she gets pulled up for not following that instruction, for not being able to do something which is not natural to her. And she slowly gets demeaned because compared to others, maybe in her class, she's not able to do it. And so when she drops out of grade 3, grade 4, when she starts coming lower attendance in grade 3, 4, 5, then in grade 6 onward, she doesn't even come. It has very little to do with her capability and much more to do with us as adults, our capability to help her grow. We've just been so out of touch with her because the education system has essentially been for urban English-speaking middle-class people to get jobs in corporates. That is how it was disproportionately designed. It's a legacy of the past. So you learn physics, chemistry, biology, irrespective of the fact that you don't have a laboratory, and there is no respect for agriculture, water, soil conservation, which is what she is good at doing. There's no respect for forest rights, and community participation in forests, which is what this thing. And so what happens is you put this girl through that, and both ways you're now going to fail, because if she goes through grade 6, 7, 8 and does her physics, chemistry, biology, and therefore somehow manages to do quadratic equations and HCl plus NaSO4 equal to, and she balances all those equations, she's not going to get a job because there are no industries there. If she doesn't do that, you're going to classify her as a dropout and incapable, and demean her self-esteem and her community's self-esteem. For me, this is the core of the problem. If you don't look at this girl and then backwork your entire policy backward from this girl, I don't see any point in the whole policy. I mean, for me, it is this is equity, trying to serve her. And for me, the policy shows several opportunities to solve for this girl. Now, whether we are administratively and financially able to do it or not, I don't know. But I think we have several things that the policy, the empathy that the policy shows for this girl, I think is amazing. And that's what I really appreciate. So one, it provides a preschool education, so which is very critical for her to get used to that. My daughter is going to go in Delhi to preschool, but she's not going to have a preschool education. So the inequity is going to start from there. Two, during the primary years, it respects the fact that there are local languages outside of the home language. I think that is very critical. So that, because I mean, if you were teaching me in French, what am I going to do? I don't know. And that is how the equivalent of assuming that Hindi is spoken in in Eastern UP. It's not. We're assuming Hindi is spoken in Northern Rajasthan. It's not. We're assuming Gujarati is spoken in Kutch. It's not. So what is the local language? It gives a lot more respect for the local language. And my vocabulary development will only happen when teaching is happening in my local language. Because, you know, my mother speaking my local language. Here for 2-3 hours I spend with the teacher. But, you know, at home it's the local language. So I think it respects the local language a lot more. And then it respects the fact that it opens up multidisciplinary education in the middle and higher years. It's no longer physics, chemistry, biology, history, civics, geography. This is what I learned, right? There's a very clear, if there's one paragraph that I think all livelihoods organizations should read in the policy, it's 4.9 and 4.24, which clearly says this needs to be interdisciplinary. We need to include the arts and the sports. We need to include local craftsmen to come in as master teachers. We need to include local professions, local culture, in order to integrate that into education. And I think this is a big, big departure which will keep and respect local communities. And at the same time, you're not saying that's the only thing that's important, but you'll be measured against international competencies. So I think the beauty of local content but international competencies is a balance that they've kept, because the final school going exam is for the competency. And I think the separation is very critical. Building on Vrindaji's point about, you know, assessment reform. So the assessment is of the competency. I should be able to infer from the text. I should be able to analyze the text, but it doesn't mean I have to be able to mug up the text. When you give me a new text, I should be able to infer again, and I should be able to analyze again, and I should be able to critique again, irrespective of the text. But the first text that I need to infer, analyze, and critique, if it is more in my mother tongue, more in my local language, more in my context, using the words that I know, the more likely I am to build the skills. So I think there is a huge opportunity for all of us. I think there's a huge opportunity for equity. The devil, as usual, like in every policy, is in the detail of implementation and execution. And I think that's where a lot of us as nonprofits get involved. And especially livelihoods organizations. I mean, I told Ved that I'm going to come with a sales pitch here as to why secondary education should be handled by livelihoods organizations and not by us as educational organizations. It should be handled by citizenship building organizations and not by other education organizations. Because we only know how to teach physics, chemistry, biology, civics, geography. That's what we have built our backgrounds on. We've not built it on soil conservation, plastics and recycling. These are the things that we need to do on forests, things like that, which is what we need to bring into education. So I'm extremely gung-ho about this. But Vrindaji, thank you for bringing up the education management issue. That's where we work. So we were very disappointed that it is not relooking at the constraints in management, because of which the implementation is going to be severely constrained. The leadership development that's required in order to cause this level of decentralization has possibly not been emphasized enough. Yes, Manmohan.
Thank you, Aditya. May I request now Nagma to share your thoughts?
Thank you, Vrindaji, for a brilliant beginning. And as usual, it is a little daunting to follow after Aditya, because he's already said everything that makes sense. But Aditya, I'm really glad you pulled and widened the discussion and brought it out of the lens of pure education. When Manmohan had, messaged me that he'd like me to join this conversation, my response, which is recorded on his WhatsApp, is, what am I going to add? Because I'm very conscious that the experts are the people here and the people who are listening. But then he explained the context. And I think the choice of even this panel is exactly what I want to talk about as a representative of how I see things should be done. We are talking about a policy that has a lot of implications and a lot of positive implications if we pull the execution correctly. But if we look at it only as an education policy, we may be missing a large opportunity. Given the stress of COVID, the timing of NEP, I think there's a lot of good if we are able to rethink the way we do a lot of things. I represent a funding community, but thankfully, because of the fantastic large group of NGOs that we support, there's a lot of learning that I've absorbed by simply the way execution happens. And like Manmohan said, I have the privilege of sitting in rooms, in spaces where I get insights into the different universes of the people who make decisions, the people who are really doing the work, the way work is spoken about. Because this is just an introduction, I want to limit my opening remarks really to this, that a unified view on what needs to be done and does not need to be done has to come from civil society for funders to act. And I say this upfront because if we don't think and if we don't pull people in together the way this the Buddha Fellowship has done today, we're missing again an opportunity of co-working. Like Aditya says, the center and the nucleus of all the work that we're doing, whatever capacity we are doing it in, is that child, is that woman, is that individual. And when if we don't think from a grounds up approach, when a policy this visionary policy comes, we lose an opportunity of milking it. With that, Manmohan, I will actually restrict my remarks, and I know we have spoken about more that I want to speak about as you ask more questions. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much, Nagma. Vanita ji, you want to share your thoughts? You are on mute. Vanita.
Yeah, I'll actually speak, on as a member of the working committee of RCRC, since this is the first webinar, and it's sort of the numbers are 60 organizations at the present time, but it is going to be increasing. So I'll focus on actually 3 areas that I think intersects livelihood issues with education issues. I think Aditya mentioned very well talked about the girl from Jharkhand, and I think it points to the human side of all of this. And I think the human side is the initial endowments, and a lot of the quality of livelihoods depends heavily on initial endowments. And so I think the early childhood focus is fairly critical for this. And I think certainly from where I come from, we see Anganwadis as both child rights and child care support to rural working women. The second part of this is generally underemphasized. And I think from the livelihoods point of view, that's a very important point for women's livelihoods. So the stake in ensuring that rural communities participate in this implementation of the national education policy is very, very high. The second part I want to talk about is the Lok Vidya and the Indian knowledge systems and the experiential learning. You know, for a long time as livelihood organizations, we've talked so much about experiential learning. And this is mentioned quite strongly in this policy, and it's almost a first, I think. And the bit on agriculture is another significant part, because most of rural India is still in agriculture, and a lot of the organizations that are part of RCRC are working on agriculture. And given that post-COVID, we are looking at climate change, we're looking at land degradation of natural resources. This Lokavidya is extremely connected to all of that. And if we can build that right from early childhood education all the way to secondary education, that could be a real plus through appropriate pedagogy and fun pedagogy. Children anyway grow up in farms. A lot of the members of RCRC have mentioned that a lot of them have grown up in farms as children. So there is a lot of connect to the land. The third part is the vocational education and skill development. This is where I have a little bit more understanding of this. And although I'll talk a little later if there's a chance to do that, I think what we have to focus on in vocational education and skill development is that it's for formal jobs as well as for self-employment. We almost think of vocational education for going straight to corporate jobs or connected to some jobs, but MSMEs, the focus on MSMEs and Atmanirbhar Bharat is so strong now. There is almost as much of a focus of vocational education for self-employment as it is for formal jobs. And when we talk of apprenticeships and soft skills, it's also there for smaller, enterprises and not just for the big corporates. And I think one miss I would say in this field in the NEP is that it is not connected as much to the market demand side. I don't see that connection made in the section on vocational education, which is unfortunate because it really has to do with employment depending on what the market can do. And gender cuts across all of this. I will be remiss if I don't mention it since I work heavily on women's enterprise. There's a gender inclusion fund in this. We need to know what we will do with it and how we will use it. And I will stop here for now.
Yeah, thank you, Vanita. Now we have, let's spend 45 minutes to go into one area. And I want to pick up the early childhood. I think you all have mentioned about how important it is to work on early childhood, and the current policy talks about universal provisioning of quality early childhood development. I just want to quote NEP one line and then ask question. Over 85% of child cumulative brain development occurs prior to age of 6. And it refers a lot more that what needs to be done. My question to Madam Vrinda Swaroop is that what are the key shift you see in the policy? And you spoke about the continuum in your opening remark. How can you help us understand better that what are the 2-3 aspects which we need to understand? And then the second question is, how do you see this is being implemented? Anganwadis are, they were recruited for different job. Now there are lots of also, conversation that how can we build their capability around that? So how do you see teacher development around preschool? So both, what policy talks about it and how do you see implementation happening?
Yeah, I think all of us are agreed that the policy itself is making the right signals. But I think there's a lot more which has to be borne in mind if we have to live up to that spirit. And the first and foremost is this is something which is not new. This has been known for a long time, and governments have also tried to work with those. The very fact that you have a near universal ICDS Anganwadi system in the country has also stemmed out of that same spirit to be able to provide services for early childhood care, which included a preschool component across the country. And also the benign attitude which allowed standalone preschools in the private sector or anywhere else to be able to cater to this need. What this policy is basically saying, and that's where I agree with the policy, is that there has to be a pedagogical alignment, and that, as Vinita rightly said, experiential learning and encouragement of the child's natural curiosity and creativity must be allowed full fruition. So if that is to be done, you must also recognize what has not worked in your experimentation in the past. And I've worked in the ICDS sector also as a director ICDS in UP. And I have worked with education, trying to bring the Anganwadis and the schools together almost 20 years. And some states have done it successfully. I see, you see Tamil Nadu is one of them. And Even a state like UP has 60% Anganwadis are in school locations. So that synergy that you were expecting, has it happened or not? My experience over the years, it's not happened. So if it's not happened, then you have to be looking at some fundamental question. I'm giving them benefit of doubt that maybe these details will come in the implementation of this policy, to the extent that, just making an institutional options that you can have a standalone, you can do an Anganwadi. These are all right for complex countries to find, differentiated solutions. But the point is that, is an institutional arrangement all that it requires? And to my mind, it's not. I think the fundamental point which is lost, and which was lost in the teacher education section, was on how do you prepare a preschool teacher. This country has no legitimate organization which recognizes training for preschool. These are all fly-by-nights who are operating. So the National Council of Teacher Education, unfortunately, their writ begins from class 1. The NIPSED, the National Institute of, which is under the Women and Child Development Ministry, which is where the training of Anganwadis takes place, is doing whatever it needs to do, but it does it for a whole program of ICDS. It's not just looking only at preschool. NCERT used to be in charge of this, and I think now the policy shifted it back. At least it's a policy, the words are that NCERT will set those. That's all right, those are, but where is the legitimacy? Where am I going to be trained as a first grade preschool teachers? If you look at international experience, some of the best, brightest, and the most rigorous courses are for preschool training of teachers. We have not looked at that. Neither does the policy even signal that. But I'm hoping that in the spirit of the policy, the implementation will see some of these issues addressed.
Okay, thank you. Aditya, I want to come to you now. Within this preschool, there has been mention of, how can we, focus on motor development, cognitive development, socio-emotional, ethical development through art, craft, theater, all of that. My question is, given your experience in working in primary education across various states, and we know the challenges there, how do you see that we fix the foundational learning and now this is the vision? So could you share your thoughts and experience around that?
So just building on what Brinda said, this execution is going to be much tougher than people imagine. It's actually easier to reform secondary education than preschool education. People imagine that teaching chemistry is tough, but chemistry you can at least give to Baiju and figure it out. What involves is how to handle my son at the moment who is displeased. And that is not a cognitive process. That is a socio-emotional process that requires extreme development of the teacher on her social, spiritual, emotional level. Not just, it's not important to teach him math. That he will figure out in grade 1, 2, 3. Or that the socialization, the psychological development, when he is feeling sad, how do you respond to it? When he's feeling happy, how do you respond to it? When he's feeling competitive, how do you respond to it? When he's feeling excluded, how do you respond to it? I think these sensitivities, especially if you combine this with the patriarchy of India and feudalism in certain parts of India, it becomes really complicated, because in these early years is when these parts of the brain are being set. His self-confidence, imagination, and his relationship to the world around. So I think the teacher development in that preschool age is going to be really, really difficult. We are imagining that Anganwadi teacher ko thoda aur tadka laga do, sab kuch theek ho jayega. I think we're going to be in big trouble if we do that. We're going to do a lot more than that. I'm not saying that the Anganwadi teacher, because she's local and because she's not a B.Ed, is not capable, because several of these Anganwadi teachers I've met are absolutely amazing human beings, and therefore intuitively they're able to do certain things. I have got the best of child development psychology available to them, in order that they're able to offer it to the children to know what to do in that context, or are they repeating their social behaviors to those children? I think unless we do that, then the child is ready for learning after that in grade 1 and 2. All you have to make, and I hope the other big risk is that we start in preschool and start devoying language maths, and then start devoying at that time itself before the child has learned anything. That is not the purpose of preschool education. It is preparatory for language and maths. So I think these are the two big things that I see. That is, how do we develop the teachers and how do we make sure the curriculum is preparatory and not actual execution of language and maths.
Thank you, Aditya. Now I want to come back to Nagma and ask a completely different question. That there may be many non-profit organizations trying to sort of work in preschool. Will you be funding more towards a joint project where there is a work in nutrition for the child, health for the child, education for the child? Will there be enough money? And the question I'm asking is because of COVID, a lot more funding has shifted to health and livelihood, right? Already. So where is the money for education then? Would be good to hear your experience on that, and many people participating in this conference might be interested to know that.
Very interested. So yes, thank you for such an easy question. But so the your question actually addresses the current concerns very sharply, Manmohan. There is unfortunately an absolute confusion amongst also funders who are very dedicated to education. कि अभी करना क्या है? And what should we do now that in school work is not going on? Can we reduce budgets? Can we figure it out? And we are feeling the questions and the pressures. There is a bit of cluelessness. I'll also here refer to something that I've heard, more coming from Kaivalya much before we even started working together, which is like at the base of it all people actually want to do good. So there is no intent or there is no program desire to walk out of and fund something else. But there is a state of confusion. What Edelgive is doing very actively, what I'm personally doing very actively, is discouraging people from really making broad statements like that and pulling out in the short term for something that in the long term we don't know how to operate around. Wherever possible, we are saying this, that for example, you asked Edelgive a direct question, so I will give you a direct answer, which is that for me, for Edelgive, for our whole team, our commitments to our existing programs are very solid. We understand that we may have to make certain decisions to manage, every this phase, but as a purpose, as a commitment to our organizations, we are very, very firm that this is a long haul and we will have to stick together. So all that discussion and nice conversation on collaboration and co-working, this is the test of all of that. And this is like we are really going through an endurance test of what we've been saying and what we will be doing in action. So this is the time to really stand up and take up. Budgets are going to suffer and this is not a secret. This is not something that is unspoken of. Universally as well as in India, we will have to figure out ways to operate with these multiple constraints. And I believe there is a way possible. For us, the way possible is through the collaborative work that is happening. For example, just yesterday when we were speaking, I told you about the MRC, which actually is the only credit I get is, or Edelgive gets, is by supporting something this brilliant. The idea came from the civil society. The structure came from the civil society. What we've done is just become a voice, become an enabler, and fill in the gaps that are coming. Now, when something like this happens and somebody says, "ये तो 100 crore का project है, इतना सारा पैसा है, बहुत risk है," and my response is really that if you go to 4 people and say fund a 100 crore project, it's high risk. If 100 people come together and say we will figure how to do this, it becomes low risk. So never before has collaboration been so important, and we have to start demonstrating multiple ways of doing it. Is what I think in this current environment we have to do. So directly answering again, no, we are not going to move our budgets to here and there, but we see that more than ever before, there is a synergy between all sectors and we have to find ways to make it happen.
Okay, thank you, Nagma. Vanita, that you have run yourself childcare centers when you were in Udyogini, and you have lots of experience that what happens when you support women with that, and if you are not able to support. What is your experience, and how do you see this policy helping those women to be more supported in this?
Yeah, what is interesting is, and this is where I think what Nagma said just now, that let's not separate livelihoods from education. A lot of us, we were an enterprise organization, and you wouldn't think that we would do childcare. As childcare as a sector, as preschool as a sector. But we did, and we did this because what is interesting is the buy-in of the rural communities was greater because we combined childcare with the livelihood support that we did for women. People don't see families as silos. They don't see families as separate units of men, women, and children. And this is something we have to understand about the culture of what we do. And if you build silos, disciplinary silos, that's a problem too. And if you build cultural silos, that's a problem too. And I think a lot of livelihood organizations absolutely recognize that. And I think we were really successful in childcare centers because of that. And what is interesting is the transition to primary school worked very well when the teachers came and told us that the kids from your child care centers do extremely well in primary school, which is what I meant about initial endowments being extremely important. And if I may just say this, that migration was just talked about, about MRC migration. I guess that's my migration resource centers, right? So yes, so a lot of the work that the RCRC is doing is on migration. And I think we would need to understand school education as a way of keeping families secure in their source areas. Women migrating with children disrupt children's education, and can we get a really good school system going, which is also primary school system, because very small kids also go, in order to ensure that they can stay back and really love the education that is given to them.
Okay, thank you, Vinita. Now I want to sort of go back to the vocational education. In the beginning, most of you have covered that in your opening remark. And I again want to quote NEP, some data that 12th five-year plan estimated that only very small percentage of Indian workforce, basically less than 5%, receive formal education. Whereas South Korea, it is almost as high as 96%, Germany 75%, USA 52%. And there is a target that by 2025, at least 50% of our learners get exposed to vocational education. So my question is to Aditya. You spoke about how livelihood organizations should come and take over that. I want you to help us understand, how do you see this policy being implemented, and what are the 2-3 areas of policy which you want us to understand, which will help us to start thinking towards the better implementation of it?
Yeah, Manmohan. So there's a difference between vocational education and vocationalizing education. So I think we need to separate these two. The policy is not saying that everyone needs to become a plumber, carpenter. That's not what the policy is saying. The policy is saying that we need experiential learning, we need multidisciplinary learning, we need integrated learning. So in 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, or let's assume from, say, up to grade 5 is basically foundational learning. So, you just have to learn your basic ability to read, write, and do basic maths. Now there's no choice in that. Now, after that, from grade 6 onwards is where really the options start as to how we can organize our system. And so from grade 6, for example, there is no connection to soil, water, resources, nothing. When I learned, I remember in your geography class, what you learn some stupid water cycle and stuff like that. But there is no project. Maybe you need to do a little bit of an activity to see the project. Now they're trying to flip it on its head completely and say experiential learning. go and actually dig the pond in the village and see whether you can do source water sustainability. Right? That's the shift that they're trying to do. When you're doing that, and you're actually digging, choosing where to dig, choosing what to dig, how to dig, how big to dig, how much to dig, how to do the soil conservation, every principle in math, whether it is, height, length, breadth, volume, everything will be figured out in math, right? Because there's no other way of doing it. Effort, I used to do these artificial problems. If one man can do 10 bricks in a day and 10 men can do 15 bricks in a day, all that. Now you can actually do that because now it's a real problem. It's not a fake problem. It's an experiential problem. So how many kids will I need to do? If each of us can dig for 1 hour a day, how much can we do? So you can do more complicated math problems in that experiential real life service project in the community. That is an experiential project that you can do. And that is your opportunity. So now you need to reorganize the teacher development in a way in which really what livelihoods organizations have been doing with community members. So rather than waiting for the community member to be classified as a grade 8 dropout, grade 10 dropout, and then running programs for her or him to understand water conservation, agri improvement, floriculture, horticulture, animal husbandry, stuff like that, you can now convert that into courses, 40-hour curriculum, put it into textbooks, bring it into classrooms, and have master teachers, as they call it, who are actually experienced in this coming and teaching that. Which means me as a science educator, my role is completely flipped now. Because then what I have to do is I have to figure out, oh, by the way, here it seems like the floriculture is an opportunity. Oh, by the way, permaculture is an opportunity here. Oh, by the way, organic farming is an opportunity here. Who's a person who can get as a resource? What are the 12 sessions she can do for 1.5 hours each? What are the projects we can do for that? This has to be flipped around. So from what I know from several friends like me who are in the livelihood spaces, normally you're waiting for the child to drop out of school and then you're teaching her how to survive with a livelihood. I'm saying, please come into school now because we don't know how to do this. We don't know how to do this. So please come into school. So we don't know how to do this. The SCRTs don't know how to do this. Converting this into curriculum is not easy. We know how to convert something into curriculum, but we don't have the content knowledge to convert. You have the content knowledge. We have the curriculum development, assessment development. You might get over into about that. We will then abstract it to certain competencies that can be evaluated at the end, right? Because it's not so important whether the pit is actually dug or not. That is not so important. But did the child use the math during that time? Did she cooperate at the time when she was stuck with the problem? Was she resilient? Those are the things we need to observe really. That from a education lens will bring in. So really these two sides need to come together. So I think one huge opportunity, so I'm going to make my pitch here, is to get 10-15 organizations from the RCRC collaborative, get 10-15 education organizations together and actually organize this to imagine if you were to say, okay, you don't want a child to drop out anymore and her livelihood can be developed from grade 8 to 12 itself, while simultaneously developing international level competencies in problem solving, multidisciplinary thinking, and head, heart, and hand happening at the same time. We need a lot of livelihoods organizations. You can learn everything about science and maths from just taking care of a chicken coop and just bringing up chickens or doing bakri ka this thing. You can learn trade, how much it costs, how much feed you're giving. Everything can be learned from this. And rather than teaching it post facto from school after demeaning the person, saying that you're a school dropout, I think the opportunity is to bring it into school, bring in respect for the livelihood. And Vanitha, thanks for mentioning that it's not about employment, it's about livelihood. The school system is organized for employment. It is not organized for livelihood. Because so at the end of the school system, I can work for GE in their research department. After I do my bachelor's and my master's, I can't go back and improve my own farm enterprise or my rural non-farm enterprise. I can't open a shop related to that. I can't add value to my herd of cows and start producing cheese. I can't train in any of those. But why can't we bring all that into schools? I think that's the really exciting opportunity. It's not about vocational. When we think vocational, typically again that has also been captured. I know Ved is recording this, so he's going to hold it against me. But that has also been captured by urban markets. The whole vocational skilling thing, right? It's again been captured by okay, can you train him to be a retail officer? Can you train him to be a banking officer? Of course, these are important. Can you train him to be a hairdresser? Can you train him to be a chef? Can you train him to be? So again, these are urban. Again, requires migration. Now, why do we need migration? Let's have local for local. You can develop your own trade till there's enough trade in the district. 20% of people can go for that portion and work in Bombay and Delhi, but the remaining 80% can find jobs locally. And I think but the curriculum is not providing for that. The empathy is not there in the curriculum for that. And after you teach me HCl plus NaSO4, I can't do. I'm just not able to do any more the actual soil conservation and testing how many types of soil exist and how much nitrogen is there. That's not what you're asking me, unfortunately, in the regular syllabus. So I think that localization is so important, that respect is so important, and that's where I think livelihood. So it's not vocational in a typical sense, because vocational in India has got represented with plumbing, carpentry, and masonry. And if you make it a little bit more sophisticated, so that's not the only portion. I'm not saying those are not important, but I think bringing in the whole agri-related thing, which is what RCRC is really strong at, can be a beautiful agenda for RCRC.
Yeah, thank you, Aditya, for that. I want to invite now Vanitha and request you to decode Lok Vidya concept, which is there in the NEP. How do you think that Lok Vidya will be sort of understood, documented, converted into curriculum? What all it takes to understand that?
For a long time, a lot of us who were who worked in handicrafts, for example, always lamented the fact, and I suppose it's true for agriculture, is that the children of the handicraft workers did not want to become handicraft workers. And this is in some ways what Aditya is just alluding to. If we can bring that Loka Vidya, a certain respectability to the traditional occupations, there is a very good chance that we will continue with some of those traditions which are dying. And I'm afraid, we can't progress if we allow our traditions to die. And so, I have a very strong viewpoint on this to say that we do have to convert some of this into curriculum. But a lot of this is experiential. In villages, they're all there. The potters are there. Why can't the children learn how to? Part of their preschool education can be pottery. And you will find them, within a few yards from where your school is. So I think we just seem to think of everything so formalized. And that's the other bit, which is that everything doesn't have to become formalized. There's a lot of informal work. Even some work can remain informal. Everything doesn't have to be formal. So the vocationalizing part that Aditya talked about is right. And if you can focus a little bit on not necessarily running to Bangalore to the IT sector, which is anyway right now might be a problem post-COVID because of all the churn in the employment sector. So this is an opportunity for us. The second thing I want to mention in all of this is there is this focus on soft skills. Now, what is soft skills? Now we are looking at customer relations as soft skill, which is in retail, this, that, and that. But there's a lot of soft skills which are associated with our traditions of how we build relationships as a currency of exchange rather than only money is what I call it. And I think the people talk about the gig economy. That is the future. There is a lot of things. And in the rural sector, nobody focuses on just one livelihood. They don't get their livelihood out of only one vocation, if you like. So for them to actually do multiple things to earn money is part of their DNA. And that, from what I can tell from post-COVID story, it's already happening, is what they're calling the gig economy in modern parlance. Should be pretty easy for the youth, even of rural areas. And we need to find ways to encourage those kind of soft skills that enable them to work even in jobs, formal jobs, and in rural areas.
Thank you, Vanitha. Nagma, if I may invite you again on the same subject, there is a lot of focus on partnership within the vocational education. Is that partnership with the industry, run incubation center, support the early adopter? How do you see the partnership changing or evolving to ensure that we come together and be able to start sort of thinking through operationalization of this NEP?
Yes, we actually did have, for the past 4-5 months, we've been discussing it. The last month has been a pretty intense discussion period on, how Edelgive needs to respond, what we need to do. What we have understood is, again, it's an opportunity because from whatever we are seeing, we have a runway of about 2 to 3 years to at least to prepare for what is about to come. Our way of doing it is actually going to reach out to our networks and really seek for how we should behave. Why do I say that? Is that this is too important for funders to take a lead on. I love the concept of the RCRC. I like the concept of the Migrant Collaborative also, because the whole power of execution, the thought leadership is coming from those who have been in the field and who have been collecting experiences and also can give some great insights as we build for the future. What Edelgive will be doing is really being informed by the people who matter, people like a Vanita, like an Aditya, who will be informing us on how to take our step forward. I personally believe that integrating the livelihoods, vocation, to migration, to education is the best bet we have forward to build what has been destroyed in the last few months. And we have a hard road ahead. But funders, ideally, and this is my my request and my statement that I'm placing here, is that because the audience here and the group of implementing organizations have really got valuable set of experiences which should be leading the way. So a voice needs to come from there to inform people like us who can influence resources to say, all right, this is the path we need to follow. Otherwise, in the absence of anything, it will follow the most convenient path. No, and again, I'm saying this as an experience even during the RTE. When RTE was very, very new, at that time, we were funding a lot of bridge courses before that. A lot of bridge courses where phenomenal work was happening. These bridge courses were enabling out of school children to integrate into school. And it was fantastic. But that phase where it was unclear, RTE kab aayega, phir aaya, then are we eligible, are we not? A lot of great work got stunted. And my effort will be to ensure that here at least we get more clarity and plan around it instead of being in this lull and saying we can't fund this and we can fund that.
Okay. Thank you, Nagma. I want to invite Madam Vrinda Swaroop to share one of the very important aspects which some of the panelists mentioned about the dignity of labor, or the social hierarchy which we perceive about the vocational education and all that. Given your experience working in the state, district and central level, how do you think we will be able to do this well to ensure that we manage dignity of labor? Your thoughts, please.
First, let me just start by saying that, the perspective on vocational education, I think the way Aditya brought it forward is really the crux of the issue. And that's the way to make a difference. And with that comes the second point, which I think is that you have vocational education will be pursued or adopted in the system largely because of its relevance. And I think this is what your other panelists are also saying. You have to make it speak for the children of families who will opt for it. And therefore its relevance is the most, and with that will build a respect for it. If I may just, demonstrate in terms of what we did for vocational education, we made it so difficult, and we made parallel lines for, there were institutions like ITIs and polytechnics, and you try to do the same thing in schools, and which was completely bogged down because people were confused. There was no proper certification. There was no ladder for the future that the children saw, and it was very resource intensive. And that destroyed it, because if you're going to make this option available in a public schooling system, it's going to cost you money. If you're just going to keep on building workshops and hiring teachers where the skill gets outdated within 10 years, and then you have fixed costs sitting with you, but you don't know what to do with. So there are a lot of practicalities, and just to digress a little bit, you have to formalize this, because everyone's looking for something which will help them self-employed or in an organization where they are a salaried employee, but they have to be able to find a ladder, find a path, and be very clear about its relevance to their lives. The second point is about it. I know it's a small segment, but it's a big segment. Big in the sense that it is important. Employability is also in mind. And now that you have systems where you can do a reasonable assessment of what local needs would be, what are the skill sets required for the local area, and then go on to do exactly what Aditya was saying, is to forge courses and curriculum where it becomes relevant and doable for children. It makes all the difference. So with that, you will establish dignity. Right now, it is completely regarded as something with an adjunct for children who cannot be academically very good. But if you do the marriage which is being suggested here on this panel, which is to make the course content relevant, as well as you're pursuing your relevant academic content, and that's the whole idea of the vocational education scheme and the revamp that it was going through for the last so many years. It's basically to be able to provide that option for children who may want to use it or may not want to use it. And then also give them pathways beyond that, so they can specialize further in that skill that they have got. Or if he chooses, no, I just want to go back to my academic subject and go further in life on that, studies or higher education, that is equally, so you can't choke off options. You have to create as many pathways for them as possible. But where this institutional dignity to this sector has to be given is if you do the right kind of things, which is to get relevant courses, develop relevant curriculum. And I fully agree with Aditya. And this has been happening, that you take the best master trainers who are on the ground. If it's a potter, you take a potter who is locally available. You have somebody who's an expert, is running a farm for so many years and doing a good job of it. Let him talk to and train them. And these are in fact less, investments are also very reasonable in this pattern. And therefore they're highly doable. So you have to formalize to an extent, because you have to have certification. And in certification also, I know for in one or two state boards which got into this, they picked out of that sector some of the best people there, and they were the ones who came and did the assessment. So this is an arrangement which it can be worked on. And the last point is, I agree completely with Vinita that there are aspirational needs also. Some people want to break free from where their parents and folks, and that is to be respected. And that option must be given to that child. And if you design the system so, the child can have an option. So I think this is India's future. If we goof up on this one at this stage, we are in serious trouble. But this is probably the right time to get the right ideas into place and create those options and create that relevance of education for children, which would be tremendous way forward.
Thank you so much. Now, given the time, always, we plan something and we run out of time. So we have not even discussed the teacher education curriculum. So maybe, we have to organize another seminar. There are lots of questions as well. So now I propose to take some questions from the audience. And the first question I want to take of Vimla Ramchandranji. She has asked from Madam Brinda Swargu, that can you speak a little more on what you think are the management reform or management overhaul important to meet the challenges of today?
Yeah, I think when we say management reforms, we are saying that, respect the largeness of the system, but you must work towards autonomy and decentralization. On the other hand, we see a trend which is actually becoming more and more centralized, whether it's in the curriculum, whether it is on teacher hire, whether it is on the responsiveness to the local community. Now, these are issues which are very complicated, but you have to move, at least as a spirit in the policy should say that we will move more towards autonomy and move more towards institutional autonomy as well as more towards accountability. What bogs the big public school system is that you can get away without performing. Now, that's not a good thing to carry on in this day and age. And so then you have to break it down in parts, in my view. We could talk of school leadership. What makes a good school work? It's a very good principle. And where you see a good principle, even in today's system, you see a fantastically run school. So you've got to look at leadership. You have to look at systems which respect that leadership, which allow that leadership to be autonomous. On teacher hiring, teacher accountability is a whole area which has been staring us in the face since independence. And you have to make systems where, I know there is a view that you must have lifelong teachers and so on, it helps them improve, etc. Sure, the teacher must be respected and the teacher must be given all the support the system can give her. But she has also got to deliver. And do we have, there is something in this policy at that point which is talking of professional standards for teacher performance. As the first time, I think even a signal has been sent that yes, we will be looking at that. So I personally think that's the way you should move forward in having those systems of accountability. And lastly, I think school autonomy is a shift which must happen in India now. Where the school itself is responsible for executing a good program, whatever it wants to do, hiring teachers who think are its best program support. So you have to have systems where you strengthen the school's performance and the school's accountability. You can have outside assessments, you can have outside gradings, and a lot of states are already doing that. But unless the propulsion of the school is good and the community around it finds it's relevant and says this is a good school and I want to send my child here so that he learns. What do you hear today? You hear that, yeah, my child goes to school, but he's not learning enough. And so gradually they fall out of the system. So functionality of schools, performance of schools is where your eye in this policy should have been. And all systems which support that, which give that school the autonomy and the accountability to do it, is where the system should move. You can design it in different ways in different contexts of the country, but that's where it should move.
Thank you. Aditya, I want another question which is asked by Ananta Kishore Swain, that because of COVID, children's learning has badly affected. And there are stress as well. So other than reducing the curriculum, what can be supplemented? That's the one question. Other question asked by Naved even before the session started, that there are lots of solutions today around technology or television or radio. There are not enough network and infrastructure. So what happens, what do we do to ensure that we reach unreachable?
Yeah, these are more contemporary questions of implementation than they are of any prima one.
Yeah.
And if I knew the answers of both these, I'd be very, very happy. Unfortunately, I don't. I can merely share how we are as an organization responding to this context. So one is there's clearly a loss of learning as a result of the last 6 months of not going to school. I started my career actually in the development sector in Kutch, which post the earthquake, which actually for a year, children had not gone to school. Every time they would come to school, there would be a little bit of an aftershock, and then therefore again the parents would not send them. Again, you'd start with 20% attendance. Slowly, we as an NGO would work it up to 30, 40, 50% attendance. Again, there'll be an aftershock. Again, it will stop. I don't mean to sound cynical, but my suspicion is in COVID, something similar is going to happen. There's one half of a COVID case, and then I'm not going to send my child to school. I don't care whether she loses learning. I don't want to risk COVID, right? So you're going to get attendance, and then something's going to be a problem. No matter how much you protect, it's going to happen and it's going to come back. So it's going to take a long time. So the learning loss is not just this last 6 months. I think you have to start planning for a 2-year learning loss for the whole country. Because it will keep, I mean, there will be, I'm not talking about the top 20 percentile who have devices and are doing something on Byju's. I'm leaving that out. I'm talking about the greater inequity that's going to be caused between those who have technology and those who don't have technology. Those who have technology are going to have a different set of problems sitting at home and doing this without any socialization, but that's a different issue. So there is going to be learning loss over the next 2 years. There's no doubt about that. So the only solution we have come up with, which is the same thing we implement, and actually I worked in the post-Ahmedabad riots as well. I worked again for restarting schooling there. I worked in Afghanistan post the war to restart schooling there. So I've been in this situation before. And the one learning I have is what is hyper-local volunteers. The school is still away from your, if you sort of break up the Gram Panchayat into a village and the village into individual dhanis, the school is typically at the village level and sometimes at the Gram Panchayat level. It's not at the dhani level. But the dhani is a reasonably safe space because it's 25 to 50 houses and it's where, you know, everybody knows each other, that no one has got COVID here, no one is coming back from Bombay or Delhi with the disease. At that level, we have to start creating some level of local volunteering from women, from young people, from adult men, whatever it is, to keep the learning going. This doesn't have to be specifically to teach you math, language, whatever. It is much more of a social process to just bring children together, have them engage in some activity, because schools are not going to open. I mean, only now we're announcing that maybe 9, 10, 7, 12 will open. But what about 5, 6, 7, 8? What about 1, 2, 3, 4? So at least you have to do something at the hyper-local level. I think that is some substitute. Now, that's not going to compensate for the learning, but then you start asking the question, what is learning? Again, go back to this tribal child. I mean, her father has lost his job. There is more domestic abuse in the family now. There is general afraid of the environment. Someone is telling you there's something called COVID, which you don't understand. There's some bacteria. Your grandfather has died. You have to get into the psychology of this child, and she's not currently prepared to do language and math learning in the typical sense. This is not a business as usual situation. How do you provide her a way to express herself? So after the Ahmedabad riots, the amount of art we did, the amount of theater we did, the amount of puppet shows we did, so that children could express themselves and their fears and their anxieties. Only then can you get back into cognitive learning. You have to first solve for the psychological, for the socio-emotional learning, and then come back to that. So don't just look at learning loss in terms of cognitive learning, look at permanent impairment. I have met children in touch who for 3 years after that still hadn't spoken because of the trauma they had experienced. So we constantly associate learning with extremely cognitive and employment-oriented learning, not a social process where I'm able to interact with others. I'm not afraid of things around me. I'm resilient. I'm positive. And that's going to be, that learning is probably 80% to 120% behind where we were before on the learning side. With regard to the reaching the unreached, this is a huge issue because our estimate based on the work that we're doing is about 25% of India has devices, which is laptops or something, smartphones. 25% of India doesn't have laptops or tablets, but has a smartphone, but it's with the father, not with the child. So she's not going to get it for more than half an hour, 35, 45 minutes a day. 25% has dumb phones, which means you can't do very much, and 25% has nothing. So the inequity when you go for online is just going to expand like crazy. And radio and TV, several states have started, but the best utilization I've seen of radio and TV is 26%. So that means only 26% of people are watching either the radio or the TV or both. 74% are not engaging, despite breaking it down into channels and for each year and stuff like that. So, it's very great to say I have a TV channel, but बच्चे देखते नहीं हैं. So क्या करें? So that's an issue. So again, I think there's no choice but to go back to hyper local volunteering. See, this is our opportunity. I think one way is to look at it as a negative, the other is a positive. We've always imagined it takes a village to bring up a child. Now it's really the situation. It takes the village to bring up a child. It takes that hyper-local community to start teaching whatever you know. Start engaging with whatever you know. To imagine that this school is this ivory tower and knows all the knowledge, knows everything. This is the opportunity to take that actually. We've been trying to take that as educationists for a long time, saying communities know, parents know, we can teach, we are not idiots. Now this is our opportunity to show that. So I would actually look at it as an opportunity. It's great that there's no tech. It's great that there's no school. Now let communities take charge. Let the young people take charge. Let adults take charge locally. And when schools come back, I think there will be a new normal interaction with the teacher and the school system. Because communities now realize that बच्चे को कुछ आता नहीं है, बच्चे ये भी पसंद करते हैं. अब भी मेरे मत बोलो कि मेरे बच्चे बुद्धू हैं, क्योंकि कुछ तो सीख रहे थे मेरे साथ. I think that's very important.
Thank you, Aditya. There is one question from Nafisa. What is in the policy to ensure they become a good human beings? How do they understand constitutional values? The much larger question, and I want to combine this with another question for Vanitha, is that how do you define the soft skills and local culture? So do you want to respond, Vanitha, on this?
Yeah, I think what happens is that, we tend to, whenever there is a formal education that a lot of it, is not in your local language, you will lose that connect. And I think the national education policy has brought that back. And I think we might want to use that local language to develop to understand the local idioms, and also all the literature and so on, that was brought, that is there. Many years ago, and I might want to give you the anecdote. There's a very well-known development person called Vijay Srinivasan. And I think she was a pioneer in Jharkhand to bring the Santhali language and literature to the children, using at that time what was a technology which was new, which was something that she had got from ISRO. And I attended one or two of those classes with the rural tribal children. And we do need people like that to develop those kinds of technologies. And incidentally, now with digital, a lot of that is available. I've seen some of the gaming stuff that's going on with people bringing the indigenous knowledge into gaming right now as part of the fun work that kids are supposed to do. So yes, it's happening. And I think if we have to mine it, the indigenous knowledge, there's also a question on indigenous knowledge, which is why I'm responding to it. And that actually brings out the soft skill. It's part of the oral tradition. A lot of the work that we did in indigenous knowledge is oral traditions. It's not written down. So we'll have to mine it. We'll have to, before our fathers and grandfathers of the next generation go away, we'll have to take that on. And yes, and bring it into, and I think Aditya did bring it, say that we have to develop the content by using some of that, take that knowledge, and somebody has to do it, yes.
Thank you, Vanitha. There is a question from Gaurav Shah. How do we make teaching as an aspirational profession? Just a second. How do we make teaching as an aspirational profession which can attract really high, really bright, committed people? Madam Vrinda Swarup, you want to take this question?
Actually, the teaching profession still does attract some very, very bright people. And I have been part of many of these recruitments, and they are actually a delight to see. I think we don't keep them that way. That's what we should be looking at. If we allow them to blossom, then you will find the kind of teachers that you would ideally like to see. But as a system, they get decimated over time, and they fall into a rut. And then no matter how much of in-service training you give them, you're not going to get them out of that. So I think that is, again, it goes back to my issue that you need a big managemental shift where the dignity of the teacher is respected and you allow her to do what she wants to do. So having said that, this is a process which will, gradually, if you make those shifts, then you will get some good boys and girls who come forward to do their, to be teachers. And the other point is that, we have made these sort of levels of testing, which is the TET and the CTET and so on, that you cannot become a teacher unless you have cleared those levels. So whoever's asking, I mean, you should see the kind of phenomenal marks they get, and they do very well, some of them. And so you're starting with very good material, and you just have to build on that and be able to take it forward. As a profession, yes, they are under severe challenge because of what is not delivered. So the parent is seeing how much the child is learning. And I have, an incident which is so deeply etched in my mind. I randomly drove into a village while I was in service in UP, and the school was shut, but there were kids playing, and then there was a chap who was going on his, going to deliver some vegetables and milk, etc., on his bicycle, and I stopped him and I said, "Does your kid study here?" He said, "Yes." So he said, I said, "How is it doing?" He says, "Well, it's good. The master comes now and then, and I send him there. He goes every day. But he's not learning." I said, "How much are you educated?" He says, "I never went to school." I said, "So how do you know he's learning?" He says, "I thought he'll help me with my hisab of what I go and sell every day. And he's not been able to do it, and he's in class 5. That was his perception. He used some of his own thinking to say, but his assessment was spot on. He felt he was not learning. The child was not learning. He had not come up to whatever little minimum standards he had set for himself, for his child. So this is a perception which also destroys the teacher. Because the faith of the community is that the teacher will make that change, will make that learning happen. So, I mean, we have to correct that. It's a very fundamental and deep-seated question. And until that happens, I don't think you'll see that what the traditional Indian system says, the guru is everything. You have to work towards that.
Thank you. There is another question from Rajesh, and he's saying that those who can afford to pay 300, 400 per month send their kids to a private school. So what is the future of government school? Aditya, do you want to respond?
Can I say no?
You work in government school, so I thought you have some understanding that what is the future of government school.
I am not worried at all. I think government schools are going to deliver more and more. If you've seen the increase in percentage of children going to private schools has plateaued in the last 3 years. It went up, and it has plateaued now. I actually believe that as government schools start delivering, children will come back to those schools. We've seen this in Haryana, we've seen this in Rajasthan, we're seeing it in UP now. The government schools weren't working. Now there is a political will to try and make them work, and they will start working again. So it's only because when the government school is completely defunct that it's not, and there's no PR behind it. So, you go to a typical district, every private school will have an ad saying, "My child, toppers 98.7%, 93.7%, 96.7%. And you keep on saying English medium is better, wearing uniform is better. So there is a lot of marketing behind private schools, which is helping them support. But ultimately, people are very intelligent. Just like Vrindaji said, वो हिसाब आ रहा है कि नहीं, private schools no better than the government. So as soon as we are to deliver in government schools for the hisab happening and for the learning happening and for the local language happening and for the respect and dignity happening, I am extremely bullish on government schools over the next 10 years. If we're able to implement this NEP policy, why would I want to pay unnecessarily and go to a private school? So I think if we just execute NEP well, I'm not worried at all.
Okay, thank you. Nagma, again, another generic question that what part of NEP you see as a most challenging to implement?
As a funder, do you and as I think the realignment, I mean, and as a distant person, I'm saying the blending of the early childhood into the mainstream schooling, I thought was something that needed a lot of good attention, because like what was rightly pointed out, early childhood in itself is challenging. We have to master it. We have to be able to do justice when we are integrating it into mainstream schooling. So how are we training those people? How are we making it? Because we are really talking about at a foundational level, we're trying to make sure that the right set of initiatives happen to a child. And what NEP has done is given us an opportunity to blend in it with mainstream schooling. So how are we going to make that happen? How are the right resources going to be applied? How are we going to choose people who are going to be responsible for making sure children catch up and are then able to move on to further years? I think that personally I find as most challenging, again, because if the age of the child, what we're going to do, how well we're going to pull it off is going to determine a lot of good learning as the years go by. So I think that would be very critical to observe. And also a question that you haven't asked, which I will tell you, I think we'll have to focus a lot of our energies and resources to make sure we get that right.
Thank you. Vimla Ramchandran ji has asked another question, and I want Madam Vrinda Swarup to share her thoughts. Does the existing Anganwadi worker have the aptitude, skills, and time to cater preschool education? Don't we think there would be a need for dedicated pre-service education workers?
I think I already addressed that in an earlier intervention, that obviously we don't think Anganwadis will deliver on this. That's pretty clear, with the kind of seriousness which this policy is talking about. And as I said, that there is a need to build up a system where you have good accredited, legit, trained pre-service teachers of excellence. Otherwise it won't work. Frankly, I think it should go a little further. I think that this policy should have categorically said that we'll shift preschool to schools and let it stick there and let one system be accountable for it. But that's something I hope they'll do.
Thank you. A question for Vanita. How can we integrate local knowledge into vocational education? Can you share your thoughts on that?
I think some of that into vocational education, yeah, it has to do, you have to do partially through experiential learning. If you're going to be doing something, in rural areas, and I would say that the locale of some of these vocational institutions have to be in the rural areas. You can't have them in talk about indigenous knowledge, etc., and locate it somewhere in an urban area. So I know in Karnataka they are talking about some of these institutions as cluster institutions, which is very much local. In which case, then you can really bring in your experts from the local areas to actually teach. It's like the same thing that we talk about in industry. That is, you can't teach entrepreneurship through a teacher. You teach entrepreneurship by bringing an entrepreneur there to the classroom. It's the same thing. You can't teach indigenous knowledge of so on unless you have a farmer who's using indigenous practices and has successfully done so. Then that person then comes and teaches as part of the vocational curriculum. It's not a teacher. So my view on vocational education is most of the vocational education will be done by people who practice those vocations. And not like a teacher in a classroom, which currently there's a lot of talk about formal vocational training done through teachers who haven't actually practiced any of that.
Okay, thank you. A question for Madam Brinda is that this NEP talks about 21st century global skill, and it also talks about the indigenous knowledge and cultural proficiency. How do you suggest teacher development can prepare for that?
Well, that's a big one, a complicated one. But I think that the two are not incompatible, and to move forward in any country, you have to marry both. So it's a good signal, and the proof of it would be in how we blend this in our, first and foremost is in the curriculum. And unfortunately, not much is said for the curriculum area, except that the curriculum should be shortened, and there should be some, values and attributes which it must carry. That's all right, but if you are looking a little beyond the NEP, it also signals that there will be a national curriculum framework, there will be consultations on that. And I'm hoping that is the mechanism by which you will be able to get this blended approach, where you are upgrading for whatever is called 21st century skills, but at the same time, you're not losing your indigenous, strengths and your experience and your own, let me say, your pivot in life. So these are things which will bear out, in my mind, first in the curriculum. And then you have to equip teachers to be able to transact that in the right kind of mood and motion, where you are able to knit these two things together and yet take students forward for living in the 21st century. So the core of it will be in what you put in the curriculum. And that's where we have to look out for, and that's where the next, I think, 2 years will go in getting that right blended curriculum. But talking of curriculum, I find one major issue in this policy, which I wish had been a little more different, which is on gender. And I think Vinita mentioned about a gender fund. But when you read the spirit of it, it is largely a provisioning attitude toward gender. There must be schools, must be upgraded, there must be facilities for girls, etc., etc. Now, I thought the value of this NEP was to shift away from that a bit and look at the content of what that education would be. So how is gender, how do you look at schools empowering girls? How do you look at curriculum being relevant and important to build mindsets which are gender appropriate, gender sensitive, gender supportive? Most policies in the past have made a very clear spirit and pitch for this. It is missing in this policy. And I hope it doesn't get lost, because a lot of implementation will capture from the policy, the spirit of the policy. So somewhere I think on gender, in the work which goes on in curriculum and teacher training, we'll have to still keep a very strong vigil on gender.
Thank you. I want to take last question. There is a question from Vivek Kumar, and Aditya, if you could respond on that, saying that the foundation literacy and numeracy is being celebrated. Is this a minimalistic way of looking at learning? Is this going back? I'm hopeful of NEP, but we're really curious to know the view.
I don't think so. I think the minimum levels of learning that was set before was a very complicated system. Foundational learning is basically, I would look at it more positively. I think the need to recognize that children need to be able to read, and that's a basic skill to be able to get other skills. because you have to read the instruction of a motor, you have to be able to read the instructions and follow the instructions for carpentry, for anything you need to do. If you can't read, it's too much of a disadvantage. And the other part of foundational literacy is basic maths up to fractions level. If you don't know 25% is the amount of interest that the local moneylender is charging, you will be impaired. Your life will be impaired in some way. If you don't know that the insurance premium costs 11,000 rupees for 5 lakhs of insurance, you don't know how to take that mathematical decision, I think you will be impaired. So I think there are basic two skills, this basic math and this basic reading and expression are very critical two skills for the survival in citizenship as well as in employment. So I look at it as a positive thing, giving a focus on that rather than saying it's going backwards. Because there are more points on experiential learning in the policy than there are on foundational learning. So I see it as, okay, that we have to get done. That is non-negotiable, and experiential and integrated and localized learning is an additional thing. I think I would look at it more positively. I don't think we're going behind.
Thank you, Aditya. There are a lot more questions on different topics as well, but time is not allowing. Common school, affordable private schools. So maybe, in the next seminar. Thank you, everyone. There is no need to summarize. I think you all have shared your thoughts openly, and I think it's extremely useful. And I'm very happy to sort of have you all on the panel. Now I want to hand over to Ved to have his last thought and then close the webinar.
Thank you all. First of all, I must thank Manmohan, who so ably moderated, and I think he was able to also bring all the questions to the table. And each one of you, I want to thank Vrinda, Aditya, Nagma, Anita also. I think I was very happy to learn so much from the conversation today myself, and I think the same goes true with each and every one of the attendees, our dear colleagues here, many of them. I think I have great regard for the knowledge that you have brought to the table. There are several things that occurred to me. I have to go into implementation of the ideas that we generated today. So I hope, with the help of all of you, we'll come back to you when we actually present the recorded version in writing, if it is possible. I have lost my all ability to write, so I'm going to ask each one of you to convert this conversation, this is recording, because not all emotions will come through in writing. But I think for the sake of the country, for the sake of the people, for the tribal girl you mentioned so eloquently, Aditya, and the Mushahar boy, that I don't know what the answer is. I'm slightly confused whether Mushahar's child will want to become Mushahar or want to become what you call a Saraswat Brahmin equivalent, to become a government officer, a bureaucrat, an IAS officer, or become an artificial intelligence professional, to do agriculture technology, or to go and back and do something in the Silicon Valley. I don't know what the future really holds, because the integration question that all of you have raised, of the experiential learning or the traditional indigenous knowledge on the, I think these are not so going to be so easy, as Vrinda said, to bring to curriculum first, and then to make teachers become proud of teaching that in the classroom, while the social society is going somewhere else, and his own children might be doing something else. Teachers' children also I am talking about, and my parents were teachers also. So I think there are difficult sociological, political, all sorts of issues that education policy brings us to think about. But I think this has been a great success, attempt to bring RCRC's attempt to bring people like you. I'm so fortunate, RCRC, I want to thank you all. And I hope we'll do another one where we'll focus also on the college education, because that is what, today we mostly focus on school and the pre-primary etc., but higher education as a pad or a platform to live life with sufficient income is the major thing. We will talk about that. Some of it was also touched upon today. But I must thank all of you for bringing your perspective, your enormous knowledge to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you all the participants and asking a very good question. So thanks a lot to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
very much. Thank you, Vivek. Thank you, Manmohan, and wonderful panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you,
Thank
Nagma.
you, Ved, for bringing us all together.
Thank
Savita.
you. Yeah.
Thank you,
So
Ved.
nice to see all of you.